Welcome to Forthright. I'm Sue Lonnie Madsen, podcasting today on a trip to Olympia at the invitation of the House Republican Caucus. First, I want to give you a little description of the setting for the Capitol in case you've never been there. The House and Senate meet in rooms with each side of the large main rotunda. Each room has ceilings arcing about 2.5 stories overhead. Each of the chambers has tiered gallery seating for spectators on the second level at each side of the main floor. And then on the main floor itself, there is an area behind curtains, which are usually in the open position, where there's space to step off the floor and meet with a colleague or constituent briefly. Lots of coming and going in this offstage area. Also off these wings are offices for the top leadership, conference rooms for caucus, and break room areas with coffee, tea, and restrooms. It's a most interesting place to people watch and to take a few meetings. So here is the column, headline chosen by the editor. As published April 27, 2023 in the Spokesman Review, with a few extra words added so that it's easier to listen to. Some things are easier to read than to listen to. The title was, "Even with one-party control, State House still has room for surprises." It turned out to be interesting, albeit not exciting. On April 17, I spent a day hanging out in the wings of the Washington State Capitol. Most of the business before the legislature that day was of the rather tedious kind, and members had plenty of opportunities to drop by my comfy chair and visit. When asked for an observation on how the session would end, then Minority Leader Representative J.T. Wilcox, Republican of Yelm, predicted it's going to be boring. Saying the word special session that day caused tired legislators to recall, but one is looking likelier after the Sunday's end of session dramatic plot twist. Watching the end of session performances on TVW is almost like being there without the 5-hour drive. A special session, if any, will take place under a new generation of Republican House leadership with Minority House Leader Representative Drew Stokesbury from Auburn and Deputy Leader Representative Mike Steele from Chelan. With only a few hours to the final curtain, a drug possession bill to fix the Washington Supreme Court's Blake decision failed on a vote of 55 to 43. Tuesday's front page reported on the results saying, "Democrats were stunned." A more accurate statement would be, Democrats claimed to be stunned when the bill earned no Republican votes. A quote from Representative Wilcox, "Republicans are not responsible for what bill comes to the floor. They decided what bill was going to be there and had clear indications from me in spite of what the governor had to say," said Wilcox, speaking on a panel of Republican legislators recorded the day after the session ended. According to Senator John Brown, Republican of Centralia, the House version failed to gain Republican support because the Democrats chose to run a bill that wasn't supported by a stakeholders group of law enforcement officials, mayors, and prosecutors. A quote from Senator Braun, "The bill was not workable by the folks that have to make it happen," he said. He outlined the 4 sticking points that need to be addressed in the House bill to make it bipartisan. Lack of Republican support should have surprised no one who was listening. A more stunning development was watching as 25% of Democrats voted against the bill. So naturally, Senator Andy Billig, Democrat of Spokane, and Senator Manka Dhingra, Democrat of Redmond, blamed Republicans for the bill's failure in their post-session media panel. So did Governor Jay Inslee in his own press conference on Sunday night at the end of session. There are 58 Democrats in the Washington House of Representatives, enough to pass any bill any day of the week, even on the last day of session. When a journalist pressed the Senate Democratic leadership on the 15 Democrats who voted no, Dhingra jumped in to answer sharply, "There were 0 Republicans, and that's the critical component here. If we want serious solutions, we need Republicans to show up." Yeah, for the Republicans reading this, we'll pause here until you stop laughing. For Dhingra, Billig, and Inslee to blame Republicans for lack of bipartisanship when Democrats have control of both chambers is disingenuous. Democrats only need Republicans to show up when their left-wing extremists get in the way of the leadership's agenda. And when the increasingly rare moderate Democrats do commit to bipartisan solutions with Republicans, all it takes is pressure from Governor Inslee's office. Case in point, the assassination of HB 1720 and its carefully balanced bipartisan riparian protection covered in a column published earlier this session. That was titled "The Rest of the Riparian Story" on February 23rd. So back in the wings on April 17, one legislator described how a carefully negotiated provision designed to reach 80% Republican support on another bill was struck in committee, and the Democrats celebrating by spiking the football, in her words. She also said there has been a caustic disregard from the majority party for other opinions. Pandemic restrictions the past 2 years isolated lawmakers and tilted one-party control farther left, said Representative Joel Kretz, Republican of Wakanda. Kretz, who retired from serving as a deputy leader at the end of the session, said he hopes the public wakes up to the overreach. We have to come back to the middle and find common ground. He wasn't the only legislator who commented on how necessary it was to get back to face-to-face meetings. Representative Marcus Riccelli, Democrat of Spokane, happened by on his way to a break room. When asked for the positive and negative aspects of one-party control, he acknowledged setting the agenda matters and, quote, you do get to do that in the majority, end quote. Riccelli emphasized he does want to see bills passed that are applicable statewide and bipartisan, and working remote or hybrid interfered with that goal. It made it hard to work together, Riccelli said. Inslee likely realizes there's no point in calling legislators back until they've worked out a compromise. Democratic leadership has two options to prevent a patchwork of laws across the state on July 1. Bring their own left-wing extremists back to the table for further weakening the Blake fix on drug possession, or work with Republicans as the critical component to a serious solution. This might get interesting. Well, I ran into two legislators at a breakfast in Spokane Valley on April 29th, and one mentioned already having received an email checking on a special session just in case. The other said, oh, the governor won't call one. And then Governor Inslee called a 30-day special session starting May 16th to solve what the Democrats failed to solve in 105 days. And he did that after he first said that he wasn't going to call a special session, like he'd call a one-day special session only when a deal was worked out. There's no deal worked out. Every time I read about this whole situation, I remember the advice from addicts I know who've managed to change their lives, or the one living in my guest room who's working on it. I ask them what they do to fix the situation, and they reply, how soon can you make drugs illegal again? I can't emphasize enough how ridiculous the governor and Democratic leadership sound when blaming Republicans for the failure to pass legislation, making drug possession and public drug use illegal. Republicans supported a bipartisan solution passed in the Senate with 14 Democrat and 14 Republican votes. Even split, even support, there is a bill ready to go. It could pass in the House. The holdup is the stranglehold of the extreme anti-MAGA left who believe drug use should be decriminalized and treated as a medical issue. There are three ways this finishes. The Democrats could water down a fix and pass it with no Republican support. The mainstream Democrats could remain hostage to the extremists of their own party, and there's no solution. And Washington de facto legalizes public drug use and possession at a state level while counties and municipalities pass their own laws. Or the mainstream Democrats decide to move on with a bipartisan bill that has the support of law enforcement, prosecutors, and mayors as one that is workable in the real world and thus gains support from the mainstream and probably most Republicans. If you have an opinion on which of these three options you prefer, by all means email not only your own representatives, but House Speaker Lori Jenkins and Senate Majority Leader Andy Billig. You could throw in the governor's office while you're at it. Thanks for joining me on this edition of Forthright. Please subscribe on Substack, with or without making a pledge, if you'd like emails notifying you of new material.